She showed up at that party just to prove she no longer felt anything for her ex. Unknowingly, she got involved with a cruel billionaire, marked by traumas and a thirst for control. If you love stories of love and romance, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel and leave a comment saying where you're listening from. Let's continue. That September night in New York City, Amber Riley hadn't planned anything beyond bleeding in silence. Her blood-red dress embraced every curve of her contained rage. Her high heels were the armor of a woman who refused to forgive, and her flawless makeup functioned as a mask to hide a shattered heart. In the main hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where New York's elite gathered for the most exclusive charity auction of the year, she witnessed the greatest humiliation of her life unfolding like a slow-motion nightmare. Derek Foster, her ex-fiancé, smiled radiantly for the society photographers beside a blonde 20-something. Brilliant as a polished diamond and as superficial as a puddle of water. Ivy Montgomery, heiress to a traditional family of real estate developers, now displayed to the world as the gleaming new trophy of the most coveted attorney on Wall Street. 2 months earlier, Derek had sworn eternal love to Amber. He promised they would build together not just a marriage, but an artistic empire that would revolutionize the American contemporary art market. Now, Amber was invisible, a forgotten shadow, in the backstage of her own public humiliation. The gesture was born from a primitive impulse, like a spark igniting a field parched by drought. Amber crossed the marble hall with firm steps, her heart exploding in flames of wounded pride, and without calculating consequences or measuring risks, she grabbed the first man she found alone by the bar. A complete stranger, tall as a tower, silent as a storm that hadn't yet arrived, impeccable black suit. But there was something tender only in the dark eyes that observed her, as if understanding her fury without needing to ask its origin or reason. And she kissed him. With all her accumulated anger, with all her wounded pride, with a desperate desire to transform herself into an unforgettable memory in the mind of the one who had rejected her. The kiss was wild, impulsive, charged with a passion born of pain. He returned it slowly, with an almost dangerous precision, like someone who knows exactly where to touch to cause maximum impact. The kiss transformed into a silent battlefield between two strangers. There was no sweetness or romance, only divided control and freshly opened wounds, trying to prove to the world that they were still capable of hurting and feeling. When they separated, breathless, Amber felt the eyes of everyone present fixed on them. Derek stared at her with an expression of shock and something that seemed like belated jealousy. Ivy whispered something in his ear, clearly uncomfortable, but the mysterious man simply released her gently, adjusted his tie with calculated movements, and whispered close to her ear, with a deep voice that made her skin tingle. "Thank you for the spectacle." It was illuminating. Amber left the museum without looking back, her heart still racing, her legs shaky, not knowing that she had just completely altered the course of her existence. What she had no idea of at that moment was that the mysterious man she had impulsively kissed was Ethan Sullivan, heir to a banking empire with roots in Boston and obscure ramifications spread throughout North America. Ethan had been absent from American public life for exactly 7 years, since he became involved in a series of scandals carefully hushed up by the media. Abusive banking contracts that led small business owners to bankruptcy, systematic psychological manipulation of witnesses in judicial proceedings, an alleged forced psychiatric internment after a violent episode, and a completely silenced investigation into the suspicious suicide of Carly Matthews, a 28-year-old employee who worked directly for him. Since then, Ethan had lived like a ghost of high society, reclusive among mansions with bulletproof gates and loyalties purchased at a price of gold, shrouded in urban legends that circulated through the most exclusive circles of New York. Ethan didn't associate with anyone, didn't smile for photos, didn't display public affection. He was universally known as the cruel millionaire, not because he shouted or made scenes, but because he destroyed entire lives in absolute silence with the surgical precision of someone who transformed cruelty into a refined art. Amber's unexpected kiss hadn't irritated or bothered him as she imagined it would. On the contrary, it deeply enchanted him, because it was genuine in an era when everything around him was calculated. It was bold when everyone around him was predictable. It was a direct challenge when he was accustomed only to submission and fear, and Ethan had never been able to resist being challenged by someone who didn't know who they were messing with. In the days following the museum episode, Amber began to notice small miracles happening in her professional and financial life, apparently without logical explanation. An anonymous collector bought 3 of her canvases that had been stuck for months in the gallery in Williamsburg, paying a value 3 times higher than what she had asked. Her bank account, which had been in the red for 2 years because of the loans she had taken to keep the studio running, was mysteriously regularized after a substantial deposit that her manager couldn't explain the origin of. A prime exhibition space in the heart of Soho was offered to her without rental cost for 6 months, with the only condition being that she organize a solo exhibition by the end of the year. Amber tried to investigate the origin of these gifts from Destiny, but all the clues led to shell companies, lawyers who refused to provide information about their clients, and contracts signed by proxies who disappeared when she tried to contact them. What seemed like an inexplicable stroke of luck gradually revealed itself as a meticulously assembled game by someone with more financial resources than moral scruples. Ethan Sullivan was behind every move, every miracle, every door that magically opened in Amber's life, and he wanted to see her, not to thank her for the impulsive kiss she had given him at the museum, but to make a proposal that would completely change her life, for better or worse. The meeting happened on a rainy Thursday in October, on the terrace of the Tribeca building, one of the most exclusive in the region. Amber went up the 20 floors with her heart racing, not knowing exactly what to expect, but intuiting that her life would never be the same after that conversation. Ethan awaited her with his back turned, contemplating the city that stretched infinitely under the fine rain, his hands in the pockets of his dark suit, an imposing silhouette against the sky heavy with thick clouds. When he turned to greet her, Amber felt again that strange sensation she had experienced at the museum, as if the air around him was denser, more charged with electricity. The dark eyes analyzed her with an almost physical intensity, as if he could read every thought, every insecurity, every secret she kept. "Thank you for coming," he said, with that deep voice that made her skin tingle. "I imagine you've already discovered that I was the one who solved your financial problems." Amber raised her chin in a gesture of defiance she didn't feel, trying to appear more confident than she really was. "What do you want in return?" Ethan smiled for the first time since she had met him, a slow and dangerous smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Straight to the point. I like that." He walked to a table where there were 2 glasses of wine and a leather folder. "I want 3 months of your life." "What do you mean?" 3 months living with me. No sexual obligations, no promises of eternal love, no media exposure. Just coexistence, raw and honest intimacy. He opened the folder and removed a contract of several pages. "In exchange, I completely finance your gallery, buy your definitive financial freedom, and guarantee that you will never have to worry about money again. Besides that, I keep you away from the shadows of your ex-fiancé, who, from what I've heard, has been spreading not very flattering rumors about your professional competence." Amber felt the blood boil in her veins. Derek is doing what? Questioning your mental sanity, your emotional stability, your ability to honor commitments, nothing that a defamation lawsuit wouldn't resolve, but that would take years and a lot of money that you don't have. Ethan poured wine into the 2 glasses and offered one to her. "With me, these problems disappear overnight." She took the glass but didn't drink, still processing the absurd proposal. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." "Precisely because of that." His eyes fixed on hers with a disturbing intensity. "I'm tired of people who know me too. Well, who know exactly what to say to please me. Who calculate every word before speaking. You kissed me in the middle of a public event without knowing who I was. That's more authenticity than I've found in the last 10 years. Amber laughed bitterly. Authenticity? I was drunk with anger and humiliation. Exactly. It was real. He took a sip of the wine without taking his eyes off her. I want to know the woman behind that anger. And if I refuse? Ethan shrugged with casual elegance. Then your problems continue being your problems. The money I deposited in your account will be withdrawn tomorrow, the exhibition space will be offered to someone else, and you will return to the life you had before meeting me. Simple as that. Amber felt cornered, but also strangely attracted to the proposal. There was something about Ethan that aroused her curiosity, a fascinating darkness that she wanted to explore, even knowing that she could get burned in the process. I need to think. Of course. He took a golden pen from the table and wrote an address on the napkin. When you're ready with the answer, meet me at this address. Any time, any day. Amber put the napkin in her purse, still feeling as if she were in a strange dream. And if I show up there and change my mind at the last minute? Then we'll have coffee and talk about art. His smile returned, softer this time. I'm not a monster, Amber. I'm just a lonely man making an unusual proposal to a woman who managed to surprise me. She finished the wine at once, feeling the warm liquid go down her throat and warm her stomach. This is madness. The best art is always born from madness. Amber knew she should refuse, that she should leave there and never look back. But as she descended the 20 floors in the elevator, with the napkin burning in her purse as if it were a hot coal, a part of her already knew what her answer would be. Amber spent 5 entire days fighting with herself, alternating between moments of absolute certainty that she should accept Ethan's crazy proposal and periods of panic in which she convinced herself that she was completely losing her mind. She talked with Melissa, her best friend since fine arts college, who almost fainted when she heard the details. Amber, have you completely lost your mind? The man is practically an urban legend. Nobody knows for sure how many people he has destroyed, shouted Melissa, gesturing dramatically in Amber's small Williamsburg apartment. And you're thinking of going to live with him for 3 months? It's a unique opportunity to solve my financial life once and for all, Amber countered, trying to sound more convincing than she felt. Besides, it's not like he threatened me. He was very clear that I can refuse. Oh, sure, after magically solving all your problems and making you an irrefusable offer. He's just a gentleman offering options. Melissa rolled her eyes. Amber, this sounds like the beginning of a psychological horror movie. But the truth that Amber couldn't admit either to Melissa or to herself was that fear wasn't the only feeling that Ethan's proposal awakened. There was also a dangerous fascination, a morbid curiosity about who this mysterious man really was, who could move financial mountains with a simple phone call, but who had kissed her with an almost desperate intensity, as if she were the first drop of water after years in the desert. The final decision came on a Friday night, when Amber was closing her studio and found Derek waiting for her on the sidewalk. He was different, thinner, his eyes sunken, surrounded by dark circles, as if he hadn't slept for days. For a moment she felt a pang of nostalgia for the man she had loved, but the sensation lasted only seconds. We need to talk, he said, without preamble. We have nothing more to talk about, Derek. I have information about this Ethan Sullivan with whom you've been getting involved. His voice carried a tone of desperate urgency. Amber, you have no idea of the danger you're running. She stopped looking for her keys in her purse and stared at him. How do you know about Ethan? Everyone knows. You were photographed together on that terrace in Tribeca. The photos are circulating in New York high society WhatsApp groups. Derek ran his hand through his hair, clearly nervous. Amber, the man is dangerous. There are rumors that he was responsible for the death of at least 3 people in recent years. Rumors, she repeated with contempt. The same thing that you've been spreading about me, right? Derek had the decency to look embarrassed. I only said that you were going through a difficult time. Lie. Amber found her keys and aggressively opened the car door. You said that I was unstable, that I couldn't honor commitments, that my art was derivative and without originality. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Amber, listen. He tried to hold her arm, but she dodged. Don't touch me. The coldness in her voice made him back away. And don't worry about my safety. For the first time in months, I'm exactly where I want to be. She got in the car and left, leaving Derek standing on the sidewalk like a pillar of salt. That night, Amber packed her bags with a determination she hadn't felt in years. Not out of anger or revenge, but from a visceral need to discover who she really was, away from all the expectations and judgments that surrounded her. The address on the napkin led her to a gated community in the Hamptons, a modern fortress hidden behind high walls and security cameras. The doorman, a middle-aged man with military posture, checked her name on a list and directed her to a mansion at the back of the property, isolated from the other residences by a grove of pines that created a natural privacy barrier. The house was an impressive mix of contemporary architecture and classic elements, all in shades of grey and white, with huge glass windows that revealed a minimalist but cozy interior. Ethan awaited her at the entrance, wearing a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves and dark pants, more casual than she had ever seen him, but still emanating that aura of controlled power that made the air around him seem electrified. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said, taking the suitcase from her hands with naturalness. "I thought so too until about 2 hours ago," Amber admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "What changed your mind?" She hesitated for a moment, then decided to be direct. "My ex-fiancé showed up to warn me about how dangerous you are." Ethan laughed, a low and genuinely amused sound. "And that convinced you to accept my proposal? That convinced me that anything is better than the life I was living." Amber looked around, impressed with the austere beauty of the place. "Besides, if you wanted to harm me, you would have already done it. You wouldn't need all this elaborate staging." Very logical. He guided her into the house, through a corridor, decorated with works of art that she recognized as originals by famous artists. "Your suite is on the second floor. It has a view of the garden and an adjacent studio that I thought might interest you." Amber stopped walking, surprised. "You set up a studio for me. I had it equipped with everything a visual artist might need. Paints, canvases, brushes, easels, even a press for engravings." Ethan went up the stairs ahead of her, carrying the suitcase. "I imagined that 3 months without creating would be torture for you. Why are you doing all this?" The question came out more vulnerable than Amber intended. Ethan stopped at the top of the stairs and turned to face her. For a moment she saw something in his eyes that she couldn't completely decipher, a mixture of loneliness and hope that made her chest tighten. "Because it's been 7 years since I've felt like waking up in the morning," he said simply. "And since I kissed you, I do." The first days in Ethan's mansion were enveloped by a dense silence, almost solid, that permeated every wall, every room, every breath. It wasn't an empty silence, but loaded with expectation, like the heavy air that precedes a violent storm. Amber quickly discovered that Ethan wasn't a man of unnecessary words. He observed more than he spoke, analyzed more than he acted, and his presence was so intense that she could feel when he was in the same environment, even with her back turned. He didn't touch her. He didn't even brush his fingers against her hands when passing a glass of wine during dinner. But he watched her paint with an intensity that made her skin tingle, as if each brushstroke revealed secrets that she herself didn't know she kept. During meals made in almost religious silence, Ethan asked questions that no one had ever had the courage to ask, questions that cut like sharp scalpels directly into the deepest wounds of her soul. "Tell me about your mother," he said on a rainy night while they drank red wine in a living room, decorated only with a lit fireplace and dark leather armchairs. Amber almost choked on the wine. "Why?" "Because you paint like someone who lost someone very early. There's a specific sadness in your brushstrokes, an urgency to capture beauty before it disappears." Ethan swirled the wine in the glass, contemplating the blood-red liquid. "It's the trait of someone who had to be strong before their time." His perception was so precise that Amber felt the defenses crumbling. "She died when I was 16, liver cirrhosis. She spent the last 2 years of her life alternating between rehabilitation clinics and fits of rage that ended with broken furniture and promises she never kept." "Do you blame her?" "I loved her." The answer came faster than Amber expected. "But I also hated her, and I hate myself for having hated her." Ethan nodded, as if he perfectly understood that heartbreaking contradiction. Love and hate are two sides of the same coin when it comes to people who have deeply marked us. Amber studied him in the reflection of the fireplace flames, noticing how the golden light softened his hard features. "And you? Did you also lose someone early?" "My mother committed suicide when I was 12. The answer came without hesitation, but with a coldness that made Amber shiver. "She was a visual artist like you. She painted crying women, always crying women. She said they were self-portraits of the soul." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Ethan finished the wine in one gulp. "She chose to leave. I chose to stay and learn that all pain has a purpose." In the following days, Amber began to notice Ethan's strange rituals. He had an obsession with stopped clocks. There were at least 20, scattered throughout the house, all marking different times, all silent. During the early hours, when she couldn't sleep and went down to the kitchen looking for water, she heard him playing the piano in the basement, melancholic melodies that rose through the walls like smoke, enveloping the entire house in an atmosphere of elegant mourning. "Why are the clocks stopped?" she asked one morning, finding him in the kitchen preparing coffee with precise and mechanical movements. "Because time is an illusion that hurts more than it helps," he answered, without raising his eyes from the cup. "When my mother died, I stopped all the clocks in the house so that the moment wouldn't pass. I discovered that living outside of time is more honest than pretending that each second doesn't hurt." Amber felt her heart tighten. "But you can't live forever in 1998. "I can, and I do." He finally faced her, and for the first time she saw genuine vulnerability in his eyes. "Until I met you." It was in these moments of brutal honesty that Amber felt the resistance that protected her beginning to melt. Ethan was dangerous, not for being violent or cruel, but for being too authentic in a world of masks. He didn't lie about his wounds, didn't disguise his demons, didn't pretend to be better than he really was. And this attracted her irresistibly. A week after her arrival, Ethan took her to know places that he frequented when he needed to feel something beyond the emptiness. They were emotionally uncomfortable spaces, an old abandoned psychiatric hospital in Westchester, where the peeling walls still echoed phantom screams, ruins of a colonial church in upstate New York, where he sat among the rubble to contemplate the impermanence of everything, a French cemetery in New York where his mother was buried, a simple headstone with just a name and 2 dates. "Why do you bring me to these places?" Amber asked as they walked among the graves covered with moss and abandonment. "Because they are the only places where I don't need to pretend that I'm okay," he answered, stopping in front of his mother's headstone. "And I want you to know me, as I really am, not as I should be." Amber approached him, feeling a courage that she didn't know where it came from. "And how are you really?" Ethan turned to her, the dark eyes reflecting a pain so deep that she felt the urge to touch him, to offer some kind of consolation. "I'm a man who learned to control everything around him because he can't control what he feels inside. I'm someone who destroys relationships before they have a chance to destroy me first." "And me?" The question came out as a whisper. "Will you destroy me too?" "Probably." His honesty was brutal and comforting at the same time. "But you will also destroy me. The difference is that this time I'm willing to be destroyed." Amber felt something moving inside her chest, a mixture of fear and excitement that she hadn't experienced in years. She was beginning to understand that those 3 months wouldn't be just about coexistence or money. It would be about 2 equally wounded people, discovering if it was possible to love without mutually annihilating each other in the process. And for the first time since she had arrived at the mansion, Amber didn't regret having accepted Ethan. Sullivan's crazy proposal. It was in the 3rd week of cohabitation that Amber discovered the existence of Ellen Richards, Ethan's silent assistant. A woman in her 40s, brown hair always tied in an impeccable bun, discreet but elegant clothes, who appeared and disappeared through the mansion like an efficient ghost. Ellen took care of everything, from meals to finances, from appointments to emergencies, with a devotion that bordered on religious fanaticism. Initially, Amber thought that Ellen would just be another well-paid employee to maintain Ethan's privacy, but she soon realized that there were more complex layers in that relationship. Ellen knew each of Ethan's moods, each emotional trigger, each nightmare that visited him during the early hours. She knew when he needed to be alone and when he needed silent company. More disturbing still, Ellen began to show a genuine interest in Amber, offering maternal affection at a time when she most needed emotional anchoring. "He has never brought anyone to live here before," Ellen commented one afternoon while they prepared lunch together in the mansion's gourmet kitchen. "In 7 years, you're the first person who has managed to make him smile again." Amber stopped cutting the tomatoes and looked at Ellen with curiosity. "How did you meet him?" "I worked for his family since I was young. I saw him be born, grow up, suffer with his mother's death." Ellen stirred the sauce with automatic movements, but Amber noticed that her eyes became distant, as if she were reliving painful memories. "I took care of him when no one else could." "When no one else could?" Ellen hesitated for a moment, then continued with a lower voice. "After the death of Isabella, his mother, Ethan had some episodes. Anger crises, extreme isolation, self-destructive behaviors. His father didn't know how to deal with him. The psychologists gave up after a few sessions. I was the only one who stayed." Amber felt a shiver run up her spine. "What kind of self-destructive behaviors?" "He blamed himself for Isabella's death. He thought that if he had been a better son, if he had noticed the signs, she wouldn't have committed suicide." Ellen turned off the heat and turned to face Amber directly. "When Ethan suffers, he wounds. First himself, then who is close. It's a cruel defense mechanism, but it's all he knows." Ellen's words echoed in Amber's mind for the rest of the day. At night, she observed Ethan with different eyes during dinner, noticing small signs that she had ignored before. The way he avoided mirrors, how his hands trembled almost imperceptibly. When he talked about feelings, how he always maintained a calculated physical distance between them, even in moments of greatest emotional intimacy. "Ellen told me about your mother," Amber said suddenly, interrupting the comfortable silence that had established between them. Ethan stopped eating and faced her with an indecipherably cold expression. "Ellen talks too much sometimes. She said that you blame yourself for her death." "Ellen should learn to mind her own business." His voice carried a warning tone that made Amber hesitate, but she decided to proceed. "You were 12, Ethan. Children aren't responsible for adults' mental problems." "Weren't they?" He dropped the fork with more force than necessary. "Then, why did she leave me that letter, saying that I was the only good thing in her life, but that not even that was enough to make her want to continue living?" The pain in his voice was so raw that Amber felt tears burning her eyes. "Because she was sick. Because depression isn't about logic or sufficient love." "You don't understand." Ethan got up abruptly from the table. "Isabella painted crying. Women because that's how she saw herself. And I am her son. I carry the same darkness, the same capacity to cause pain in those who love." "Ethan, that's why I don't have relationships, Amber. That's why I live isolated, controlling every aspect of my life." He walked to the window with his back to her. "Because every time I allow myself to feel something real for someone, I end up repeating the cycle. I end up causing exactly the kind of pain that my mother couldn't bear." Amber got up and walked to him, fighting against the impulse to touch him. "And the other women?" "Ellen said there were others." Ethan laughed with bitterness. 3 in the last 15 years, relationships that lasted a few months each, until I managed to destroy them completely." He turned to face her, his eyes shining with an almost feverish intensity. "The first left the house one night and never came back. She simply disappeared, leaving only a note saying that she couldn't live with me anymore. The second had a nervous breakdown and needed to be hospitalized. The third what?" "The third was Carly Matthews, the employee who committed suicide 7 years ago." The confession came out as a harsh whisper. "She worked for me, fell in love, I corresponded for a few months, then I began to push her away when I realized it was getting too serious. She couldn't handle the rejection." Amber felt the ground collapse under her feet. Ethan. Now do. You understand why I live as I live? Why Ellen watches me constantly? Why I should never have brought you here? He approached her, his breathing heavy, his eyes wild with controlled despair. Because I destroy everything I touch. And you're already beginning to mean too much to me. Amber felt her heart race, not from fear, but from a strange combination of compassion and desire that she couldn't explain. For the first time, she completely understood what Ellen had tried to say. Ethan was dangerous not for being evil, but for loving in a destructive way, for not being able to separate protection from control, care from possessiveness. And if I'm willing to take that risk? The question came out before she could censor herself. Ethan stared at her as if she had completely lost her mind. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do. Amber took a step toward him, feeling a desperate courage taking over her chest. I know that I'm adult enough to choose my own dangers. I know that I've spent my entire life being underestimated and protected by men who thought they knew what was best for me. And I know that I prefer to risk myself with someone who is honest about his demons than to live safely with someone who hides his. For a moment, Ethan seemed genuinely lost, as if he didn't know how to react to her refusal to be frightened by his confessions. And it was in this moment of absolute vulnerability that Amber finally allowed herself to touch him, placing the palm of her hand against his face, feeling the warm skin and the stubble brush against her fingers. Let me decide if you're worth the risk, she whispered, and for the first time since they had met, Ethan didn't back away from the touch. Their first kiss happened 3 days later, on a Sunday afternoon charged with electrical tension and torrential rain. Amber was painting in the studio that Ethan had set up for her, lost in a canvas that portrayed two silhouettes touching each other through a foggy glass, when she heard him enter silently. She didn't turn, but she felt his presence as she always felt, an alteration in the density of the air that made her skin tingle with anticipation. Is it about us? He asked, observing the painting over her shoulder. It's about impossibility, Amber replied, without stopping, brushing. About two people who desire each other, but who know that if they touch each other, they can destroy each other mutually. And yet they keep trying to touch. Even so, she finally turned to face him, her eyes still shining with the creative intensity that always possessed her when she painted. Because sometimes destruction is preferable to emptiness. Ethan studied her with that disturbing intensity that she had learned to recognize, as if trying to decipher every thought behind her eyes. They were too close. She could feel the heat emanating from his body, the smell of his perfume mixed with something purely masculine that made her dizzy. The rain violently hit the windows of the studio, creating a chaotic symphony that echoed the tumult in their hearts. Amber, he whispered, and there was something broken in his voice that made her stomach contract. Don't say it's wrong, she whispered back, letting the brush fall to the floor. Don't say we shouldn't, not now. Instead of responding, Ethan raised his hands and held her face with a delicacy that completely contrasted with the feral intensity in his eyes. For a moment that seemed eternal, they just looked at each other, breathing the same air, sharing the same space charged with desire and fear. Then he kissed her, slowly at first, almost hesitantly, as if he were testing his own capacity for gentleness. But Amber didn't want gentleness. She wanted all the intensity, all the darkness, all the destructive passion that he kept inside his chest. She intertwined her fingers in his hair and deepened the kiss, lightly biting his lower lip, drawing from him a low moan that reverberated through their bodies like a silent earthquake. Ethan's carefully constructed control crumbled like a house of cards. He pressed her against the wall of the studio, his hands exploring every curve of her body with a desperate hunger, as if trying to memorize every inch of her skin. Amber corresponded with the same hungry intensity, her nails lightly scratching his back under his shirt, feeling the muscles contract under her touch. You don't know what you're getting into, he murmured against her neck, his voice hoarse with desire. Then show me, she challenged, biting the lobe of his ear. Ethan carried her to the leather sofa that was in the corner of the studio, his hands trembling slightly while unfastening the buttons of her blouse. Each touch was preceded by a look of confirmation, as if he still couldn't believe that she was there, that she was allowing this, that she hadn't fled yet. What happened between them was physical, intense, sweaty, but also permeated by a desperate tenderness that neither had experienced before. It was sex, but it was also war, it was also healing, it was also self-destruction. Ethan made love as if he were trying to completely lose himself in another person, and Amber responded as if she were trying to find herself through the intensity of being desired in that absolute way. Afterward, they lay intertwined on the narrow sofa covered only by a blanket that Ethan went to fetch, listening to the rain gradually diminishing until it became just a soft murmur against the windows. Amber traced lazy circles on his chest with her fingertips, feeling the accelerated beats of his heart slowly calm down. "Now are you going to leave me?" she asked, breaking the silence with the question that terrified her. "I should," he answered, honest as always. "But I can't." "Why not?" Ethan sighed deeply, his fingers playing with the loose strands of her hair. "Because you're the first person in years who looks at me as if I were more than my mistakes, as if there was something in me worth saving." Amber raised her head to face him. "And is there?" "I don't know." He touched her face with a softness that contrasted with the brutality of his previous confessions. "But with you for the first time I want to find out." It was that night that Amber realized she had crossed a point of no return. It was no longer just a matter of fulfilling 3 months of contract or solving financial problems. She had fallen in love with Ethan Sullivan, not with the romanticized version that could exist, but with the real, wounded, dangerous, and desperately lonely man who hid a heart capable of loving with enough intensity to kill or heal. In the days that followed, they established an intimate routine that oscillated between moments of overwhelming passion and periods of contemplative silence. Ethan continued working in his office during the mornings, but they had lunch together every day, talking about art, literature, philosophy, conversations that extended for hours and revealed increasingly deeper layers of their personalities. Amber discovered that Ethan read voraciously, that he spoke 4 languages fluently, that he could play classical piano with a technique that bordered on professional. He in turn was fascinated by the way she saw the world through colors and textures, how she could translate complex emotions into brushstrokes that spoke directly to the soul. But there were also tense moments when Ethan's controlling nature manifested in subtle but disturbing ways. He wanted to know where she was at every moment, became visibly uncomfortable when she mentioned any contact with people outside the mansion, and had crises of irrational jealousy when she showed affection for Ellen or mentioned missing Melissa. "You're isolating me," Amber confronted him one night, after he suggested for the 3rd time that she cancel a lunch scheduled with Melissa. "I'm protecting you," he countered, but there was a tension in his voice that revealed that he knew he was crossing boundaries. "Protecting me from what? From having a normal life? From maintaining healthy friendships?" Ethan didn't respond immediately, and Amber saw in that silence the confirmation of her worst fears. He was repeating the pattern that had destroyed his previous relationships. Love transformed into possessiveness, care transformed into control, protection transformed into a golden prison. And for the first time since she had accepted that crazy proposal, Amber wondered if she hadn't committed the biggest mistake of her life. The first major crisis between them exploded on a Tuesday in November, when Amber discovered that Ethan had secretly cancelled her exhibition in Soho. She found out through Melissa, who called furiously to tell her that the gallery had contacted her, informing that the event was indefinitely postponed due to contractual issues. Amber found Ethan in his office, surrounded by papers and speaking, on the phone in Italian in an icy tone that she had learned to associate with his most dangerous moments. He ended the call as soon as he saw her standing at the door, but didn't show any embarrassment or regret. "You cancelled my exhibition," she said, without roundabouts. "Postponed," he corrected, with that calculated calm that made her want to break things. until you're ready for that kind of public exposure. Until I'm ready. Amber's voice went up an octave. Who are you to decide when I'm ready for anything? Ethan got up from the chair, going around the desk to approach her. Someone who knows how this city works, how the media operates, how people like Derek can use a public exhibition to attack you. People like Derek? Amber laughed with bitterness. You mean normal people who don't live hidden behind walls and armed security guards? People who hurt you before and will hurt you again if they have the opportunity. His voice carried an edge of possessiveness that made Amber instinctively back away. You don't understand how the power games work in this environment. Then explain it to me. Include me in the decisions that affect my life. Amber hit her fist on the desk, making the papers flutter. Stop treating me like I'm a child incapable of making my own decisions. You want to know how the games work? Ethan opened a drawer and removed a thick folder, throwing it on the desk in front of her. Read this and tell me if you still think I'm being paranoid. Amber opened the folder with trembling hands and felt the blood freeze in her veins. They were detailed investigations about Derek, documents that revealed connections that she had never imagined existed. Fraudulent contracts, bribes for judges, money laundering schemes through art auctions. But what shocked her most was finding her own name mentioned several times, along with photographs of her taken without her knowledge in recent months. Derek has been under investigation by the FBI for 2 years, explained Ethan, observing the growing paleness on her face. He used your gallery and your contacts in the artistic environment to authenticate fake works. You were the perfect facade. Respected artist, passionate girlfriend, reliable witness. That's a lie, whispered Amber, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. The bank transactions are real. The forged signatures are real. The testimonies of the other artists involved are real. Ethan approached her but kept his distance when he saw that she was shrinking. Amber, didn't you ever wonder why he became interested in you? Why a successful Wall Street attorney chose a relatively unknown artist from Williamsburg? His words hit Amber like punches to the stomach. All the memories that she had cherished began to reorganize themselves under a new sinister light. Derek's apparently casual questions about other artists, his sudden interest in learning about authentication techniques, the mysterious clients that he sometimes brought to see her work. You knew this from the beginning, she said, and it wasn't a question. I suspected, I confirmed after we started our arrangement. Arrangement, Amber repeated the word as if it were poison. Is that what we are to you, a commercial agreement? Don't distort my words. Then clarify. Tell me why you really brought me here. Amber stood up, her chest rising and falling. Rapidly. Tell me if I'm just a piece in your game of revenge against Derek. Ethan was silent for a moment too long, and that silence was all the answer that Amber needed. She felt something definitively breaking inside her chest, a disillusionment so deep that it made her stagger. It started being about Derek, he finally admitted, but it's not anymore, not for weeks. Lie. The tears began to run down her face. Everything is a lie. You, Derek, my whole life is a lie built by men who think they can use me for their own ends. Amber, let me explain. No! She backed away when he tried to touch her. Don't touch me, don't lie to me anymore, please. Amber ran to the bedroom, packed her bags with trembling hands, and went down the stairs determined to leave that mansion to never return. But she found Ellen waiting for her in the living room, with an expression of genuine sadness that made her hesitate. He told you about Derek, observed Ellen, not needing confirmation. I imagine how betrayed you feel. You know everything, don't you? Amber let the suitcase fall to the floor. You know that I was just a piece in a game. I know that Ethan is a man who confuses protection with control, love with possessiveness. Ellen approached her carefully. But I also know that I've never seen him as destroyed as he is now, seeing you leave. He deserves to feel destroyed. Maybe. But you also deserve to know the whole truth before making a final decision. Ellen took an envelope from her pocket and extended it to Amber. There's something that Ethan didn't tell you. Something about the accident that you mentioned once. Involving Derek's sister. Amber felt the world stop. She had never mentioned the accident to Ellen. In fact, she had never mentioned it to anyone except to Derek years ago, in a tearful confession during a night of insomnia and too much wine. "How do you know about Sophia?" she whispered. "Because Sophia didn't die in the accident that you think you caused," Ellen responded softly. "Sophia was murdered by Derek 2 days after the accident, and he let you carry the guilt for a death that you didn't cause, using that guilt to psychologically control you throughout your entire relationship." Amber opened the envelope with fingers that trembled uncontrollably. Inside were medical reports, archived police reports, witness testimonies. Sophia Foster had survived the car accident. She had been found dead in her apartment 48 hours later, with clear signs of asphyxiation. Derek had discovered that she was planning to tell their parents about his illegal schemes and decided to silence her permanently. "Why does Ethan have this information?" asked Amber, her voice coming out like a thread. "Because he loved you enough to want to clean your conscience," Ellen answered. "Because he spent the last 2 months investigating every detail of your past, not to use you, but to free you from the lies that Derek planted in your mind." Amber collapsed on the sofa, the weight of the revelation crushing any anger she still felt for Ethan. Sophia was alive when she left the hospital. Sophia could have continued living if it weren't for Derek's calculated cruelty. And she had spent 7 years hating herself for a death that she hadn't caused. "He wanted to tell you," Ellen continued, "but he knew that you needed to be emotionally prepared to process such a brutal truth. And now?" Amber looked at Ellen through tears. "What do I do now with this information?" "Now you decide if Ethan deserves a chance to explain why he did what he did. And if you two deserve a chance to build something real, based on the complete truth, not on the lies that others planted between you." Amber spent the entire night awake, sitting on the bedroom floor, surrounded by the documents that Ellen had given her, trying to process a truth that completely rewrote the narrative of her own life. Sophia was alive when she left the hospital. Sophia could still be alive if Derek hadn't decided to silence her to protect his criminal schemes. The guilt that Amber had carried for 7 years, the self-punishment she had inflicted, the sleepless nights rehashing every second of that fateful afternoon, everything had been based on a carefully constructed lie. When the sun rose, she made a decision that both terrified and liberated her at the same time. She was going to confront Derek, but first she needed to talk to Ethan. She found him in the garden at the back of the mansion, sitting on a stone bench in front of a small artificial lake, still wearing the same clothes from the day before, as if he also hadn't been able to sleep. There was something broken in his posture, a vulnerability that she had never seen before, as if all his defenses had crumbled during the night. "Ellen told me about Sophia," said Amber, sitting beside him without ceremony. Ethan didn't look at her immediately. "I wanted to tell you personally, in my way, in my time." "When?" "After I had fallen so deeply in love with you that I could no longer question your motivations. After you trusted me enough to believe that everything I did was to protect you." He finally turned to face her, his eyes red from fatigue and something that seemed like contained despair. "Amber, when I discovered that you were carrying the guilt for Sophia's death, when I saw how that lie was destroying you from inside, you decided to play God," she interrupted, but without the anger he expected. "You decided that you knew what was best for me." "Yes." The admission came out as a defeated sigh. "Because I'm a controlling man who learned to solve problems by manipulating situations instead of simply talking about them." Amber studied his profile in the golden reflection of the morning, seeing in him not the dangerous man that everyone feared, but a deeply wounded person trying to love in the only way he knew, through excessive control and protection. "Were you going to tell me?" "Eventually?" "I was. But I was afraid of how you would react. I was afraid that you would decide to confront Derek alone and put yourself in danger." Ethan ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that she had learned to recognize. "I was afraid of losing you, and now I know that I've already lost you anyway." Amber was silent for a long moment, watching the ducks swim placidly in the lake, pretending that the world around them wasn't crumbling. Then she made a decision that surprised them both. I'm going to confront Derek today, and I want you to go with me. Ethan stared at her as if she had completely lost her mind. Amber, this is dangerous. Derek killed his own sister to protect his schemes. He won't hesitate to hurt you if he feels cornered. Exactly. That's why I need you there. Amber stood up, feeling an iron determination taking over her chest. I need to look into his eyes and hear from his mouth that he lied to me for years. I need to close this cycle to be able to move forward, whether with you or without you. Derek's law office was on the 20th floor of a mirrored building on Wall Street, all decorated in shades of grey and marble, designed to intimidate clients and impress partners. Amber hadn't set foot there in months, but the place still smelled like the expensive perfume that Derek used, a fragrance that she used to associate with security and now caused her nausea. Derek received her with a mixture of surprise and caution. Clearly uncomfortable with Ethan's silent presence beside her, the two men greeted each other with the icy courtesy of enemies who mutually respect each other, but Amber could feel the electric tension that hung in the air between them. Amber, what a surprise, said Derek, trying to sound casual. I thought you were too busy for social visits. I came to talk about Sophia, she said directly, observing how his face instantly paled. Sophia? Derek sat behind the desk, as if he needed a physical barrier between them. Why do you want to talk about my sister after so many years? Because I discovered that she didn't die in the accident. Amber placed the documents that Ellen had given her on the desk. I discovered that she survived and was murdered 2 days later. By you. The silence that followed was so dense that Amber could hear her own heart beating out of sync. Derek looked at the documents without touching them, then at Ethan, then back at her, and Amber saw the exact moment when he decided to stop pretending. She was going to destroy everything, he said, with a coldness that made Amber shiver. She was going to tell our parents about the business. She was going to denounce me to the police. She was going to ruin our family because of moralistic scruples. She was your sister, whispered Amber, incredulous. She was a dangerous idealist who didn't understand how the real world works. Derek got up, walking to the window. Just like you, always thinking that art and moral purity can coexist in a world where everything has a price. Is that why you lied to me? Is that why you let me carry the guilt for a death that I didn't cause? Because you were useful carrying that guilt. His brutal honesty hit her like a slap. Guilty you were moldable. Grateful for me forgiving you for something you thought you had done. You never questioned my methods or my contacts. You authenticated the works that I needed authenticated and stayed quiet about the transactions that you witnessed. Amber felt Ethan move beside her, a dangerous tension emanating from his body, but he remained silent, letting her conduct the confrontation. You used me, she said, and it wasn't a question. I loved you, Derek corrected, in my way, within my possibilities. You were useful, yes, but you were also genuine, passionate, real, rare qualities in my world. Until I stopped being useful. Until you started asking too many questions, questioning transactions, becoming a risk. Derek sat down again, recovering, part of his professional composure. The separation was inevitable, but I never planned to hurt you. You destroyed me, said Amber, with a calmness that surprised her. You made me believe that I was a murderer. You made me carry a guilt that wasn't mine. You isolated me from friends and family, using that guilt as a chain. And now? Are you going to denounce me? Derek looked at Ethan with contempt. Are you going to let your new rich protector solve your problems like men always do in your life? It was then that Amber completely understood what she needed to do. Not for revenge, not for justice in the legal sense, but for herself, for Sophia, for the woman she had been before meeting Derek, and for the woman she could become after leaving him definitively in the past. I'm going to do something that you never did for me, she said, standing up. I'm going to choose for myself, based on the complete truth without manipulation or emotional blackmail. She took the documents from the desk and walked toward the door, Ethan following her in silence. At the door, she turned one last time to look at Derek. Sophia. deserved a better brother," she said, "and I deserved a more honest love. But now I know that I can choose to deserve better things from here on." And for the first time in 7 years, Amber Riley left a meeting with Derek Foster feeling completely free. They drove back to the Hamptons in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, processing the confrontation that had changed everything and nothing at the same time. Amber observed the city passing by the window, feeling a strange sensation of lightness that she hadn't experienced in years. The guilt that she had carried as a physical weight in her chest had simply disappeared, leaving in its place an emptiness that she still didn't know how to fill. It was only when they arrived at the mansion that she realized that she had made a decision without even consciously consulting her rational mind. She didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not in that way, with so many things to resolve between her and Ethan. "Thank you," she said, when he turned off the engine in the garage. "For what?" "For letting me conduct the confrontation. For not trying to protect me from a truth that I needed to hear." Amber turned in the seat to face him. "For letting me be strong when I needed to be." Ethan smiled, but it was a sad smile, loaded with resignation. "It's more than I deserve, considering how I manipulated the situation from the beginning." "Yes, it is." Her agreement made him blink, surprised. "You manipulated me, you controlled me, you made decisions for me without consulting me. You repeated exactly the patterns that destroyed your previous relationships." "Amber, let me finish." She raised her hand, asking for silence. "You did all that, but you also gave me the truth when I needed it. You gave me courage when I didn't know I had it. You showed me that I can be loved intensely without having to diminish myself in the process." Ethan was silent, studying her face as if trying to decipher where that conversation would lead them. "The contract ends in 2 weeks," Amber continued, "and I will leave when it ends." "I understand." His voice came out more controlled than she expected, but Amber saw the pain that he tried to hide. "But not because I don't love you," she added, and it was the first time that she pronounced that word between them. "Because I love you, and I know that you love me. But love isn't enough if it doesn't come accompanied by respect, trust, and the capacity to let the other person be who they really are." "And I'm not capable of that," he said with bitterness. "You weren't. But people can change, Ethan. If they want to very much. If they're willing to do the difficult work of knowing themselves and challenging themselves." Amber opened the car door, but before leaving she added, "The question is, do you want to?" In the days that followed, they established a strange, almost ceremonial dynamic. They lived together as before, but there was a respectful formality between them, as if they were two diplomats negotiating a delicate treaty. Ethan didn't try to control her or make decisions for her. Amber didn't move away or get too close. Both seemed to be evaluating if it was possible to rebuild something on the ruins of what they had had. It was during this period that Amber received an unexpected call from a curator at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Her 3 canvases, sold anonymously, had caught the attention of important collectors, and he wanted to propose a solo exhibition for the next year. It was the professional opportunity that she had dreamed of her entire life. "Are you going to accept?" asked Ethan during dinner, after she told him about the proposal. "I am, but I'm going to use my own name this time, assume my own career, without protections or facilities." Amber took a sip of wine, thoughtful. "It's time to discover what I'm capable of when I'm not being controlled or manipulated by anyone. Even if that means facing criticism, competition, rejection, especially because of that." She smiled, and Ethan noticed that there was a strength in her eyes that wasn't there when they met. "I've spent too much time letting men decide what I was capable of enduring." That night, for the first time in 2 weeks, Ethan appeared at the door of her bedroom. He didn't enter, just stood at the doorframe, as if he were asking silent permission. "Can I sleep here?" he asked, vulnerable in a way that broke her heart. Amber moved the covers in response. They lay together but didn't make love. They just hugged in the dark, breathing the same air, sharing the same space loaded with love and anticipated longing. "I don't know how to be different," whispered Ethan against her hair. "Then learn," she whispered back, "if you really want to. And if I can't? Then at least you tried, and that's already more than most people do. On the penultimate night of the contract, Ethan took her to a place that she didn't expect. His mother's studio, preserved exactly as it was on the day of her death, in an abandoned house in the Berkshires. It was a small and chaotic space, with canvases stacked against the walls, dried-up tubes of paint, brushes still dirty and a can of turpentine that smelled of lost memories. "Why did you bring me here?" asked Amber, delicately touching one of Isabella's unfinished canvases. "Because I finally understood that she didn't kill herself because she couldn't love," said Ethan, observing Amber explore the space with reverence. "She killed herself because she loved too much and didn't know how to deal with the intensity of her own feelings." Amber stopped examining the paintings and turned to face him. "I am her son, Amber. I carry the same intensity, the same propensity to love in a destructive way." Ethan walked to one of the windows, contemplating the mountainous landscape that extended beyond the dusty glass. "But I can also choose to learn from her mistakes, instead of repeating them." "And what does that mean?" Ethan turned to her, and Amber saw in his eyes a determination that wasn't there before, mixed with a genuine fear that made him more human than ever. "It means that I'm going to start therapy. It means that I'm going to learn to trust instead of control. It means that I'm going to discover how to love someone without trying to mold her to fit my insecurities." He approached her slowly, as if he were still testing if she would allow the proximity. "And it means that if you give me a second chance, it will be genuinely different from the first." Amber studied his face for a long moment, looking for signs of manipulation or empty promises. But all she saw was an adult man, assuming responsibility for his destructive patterns and committing to do the work of changing them. A second chance. "At what exactly?" she asked. "At building something real with you. Without contracts, without expiration dates, without power games." Ethan held her hands with delicacy, as if he were holding something precious and fragile. "Just two adults, choosing every day to try to be better for each other." Amber felt tears burning her eyes, but they were tears of hope, not of sadness. "And if it doesn't work, and if you return to the old patterns, then you leave, and I'll have to live with the consequences of my choices." His brutal honesty made her smile through the tears. "But I prefer to take that risk with you than to live safely and alone without you." Outside, the sun was beginning to set over the mountains, tinting the sky pink and gold, creating the perfect frame for a moment that seemed taken from one of the romantic paintings that Amber painted in her most optimistic dreams. 6 months later, Amber was in front of the mirror of her new apartment in Greenwich Village, adjusting the black dress that she had chosen for the opening of her first solo exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from a pure excitement that she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in her life, she was about to show her work to the world without needing the approval, protection, or manipulation of any man. The apartment was small but luminous, with large windows that gave onto a tree-lined square and an improvised studio in what should have been the second living room. It was her space, paid for with her own work, decorated, with her own tastes, without concessions to please anyone besides herself. It was the first time in her adult life that she lived completely alone, and the sensation of absolute autonomy still surprised her every day. The phone rang, and she answered already, knowing who it was. "How are you feeling?" Ethan's voice on the other end of the line carried a mixture of pride and anxiety that made her smile. "Terrified and euphoric at the same time," she admitted, finishing applying lipstick. "It's a strange sensation, but good. Do you still want me to come?" It was a question that he asked every week since she had moved. Never pressure, never insistence, just the respectful offer of his company when she wanted and needed it. The 6 months of separation had been difficult for both, but also necessary. Ethan was indeed doing therapy 3 times a week, working on his issues of control and abandonment with a psychologist specialized in childhood traumas. Amber was rediscovering who she was when she wasn't reacting to the manipulations or expectations of others. They saw each other once a week for dinner, long and careful conversations where they practiced the art of knowing each other again without hidden agendas. They didn't sleep together, didn't make plans for the future, didn't talk about love. They simply allowed themselves to enjoy each other's company, slowly and carefully, like two people who had learned that real intimacy cannot be forced or manipulated. "Yes, I do," said Amber, surprising herself with the certainty in the answer. "But as my friend, not as my savior or protector." "Understood. I'll meet you there at 8? At 8. The exhibition was a success even before officially beginning. Amber arrived at the museum and found a line of people waiting to enter. Important art critics leafing through the catalogue. Collectors whispering among themselves about pieces they would like to acquire. Melissa was there, radiant with pride, wearing a red dress that she insisted was the color of my best friend's victory. Ellen had also attended, elegant as always, but with a genuinely warm smile that made Amber feel embraced. The main series of the exhibition was called Portraits of Guilt, 15 canvases that explored the emotional weight of carrying responsibilities that don't belong to us. They were visceral, honest paintings, painful to look at, but also cathartic. Amber had managed to transform 7 years of internal torment into art that spoke directly to the soul of anyone who had ever blamed themselves for things beyond their control. "It's extraordinary," said the curator, approaching her with a famous art critic from the New York Times. "You managed to capture something universal about the human experience of carrying guilt that isn't ours." Amber smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with external validation, and everything to do with the fact that she had managed to transform her pain into something beautiful and meaningful. It was when she saw Ethan enter the hall that her heart raced, not from nervousness, but from a genuine joy that surprised her. He was different, lighter somehow. The suit was still impeccable, but there was something in his posture, in the way he smiled at people, that indicated a man who was learning to live outside the armor of control that he had worn for so long. He walked through the exhibition slowly, stopping in front of each canvas, studying them with the attention of someone who really understood art. When he reached the last piece, a self-portrait of Amber freeing herself from invisible chains, he stood for long minutes, and Amber saw a tear discreetly run down his face. "It's about rebirth," she said, approaching him. "It's about courage," he corrected, turning to face her. "About choosing to free yourself even when it's easier to remain a prisoner." They talked. For hours, circulating through the exhibition, he asking intelligent questions about technique and creative process, she explaining the stories behind each work. It was different from the intense and charged conversations they used to have. It was lighter, more natural, more like two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. "Do you want to have dinner?" he asked when the museum began to empty. "I do, but let's take the subway. I want to celebrate like normal people celebrate." Ethan laughed, and Amber realized that she hadn't heard him laugh so casually in months. "I don't even remember the last time I rode the subway." "Then it's time to start doing normal things again." They dined at a small Italian restaurant in the city center, sharing a bottle of red wine and talking about everything and nothing. Movies they had watched, books they were reading, plans for the future that didn't necessarily involve each other. It was comforting and frightening at the same time, this ability to be together without needing to define what they were or where it would lead them. "Can I ask you a personal question?" said Amber when they were at dessert. "Always. Are you happy? Now, with the therapy, with the changes you've made?" Ethan considered the question carefully before answering. "I'm less unhappy, and for the first time in years, I wake up in the morning feeling curiosity about what the day might bring, instead of just trying to control it. It's a start. It's a miracle, considering where I came from." He held her hand over the table, a soft touch without possessiveness. "And you, are you happy?" "I'm learning what happiness is when it's not based on the approval of other people," she answered honestly. "It's frightening, but also liberating." "I love you," he said suddenly, and Amber felt her heart stop. "I'm not saying this to pressure you or to get something. I just want you to know I love you in the most honest way that I've learned to love so far." Amber studied his face, looking for signs of the subtle manipulations of the past, but all she saw was transparency, An adult man expressing his feelings without expectations, without demands, without conditions. "I love you too," she finally said, "but I still don't know if that's enough for us to build something together. It doesn't need to be, not yet." Ethan intertwined his fingers with hers. "We can discover together, in our time, in our way." They walked through the streets of the city center after dinner, unhurried, without a specific destination, just enjoying each other's company and the city that opened before them full of possibilities. When they said goodbye at the subway station, Ethan kissed her softly, a kiss that didn't demand anything beyond what she was willing to give at that moment. "I'll call you tomorrow?" he asked. "Call," she responded, and for the first time in months, Amber Riley went home feeling genuinely hopeful about the future. 6 months after that night, they moved in together to a house in Williamsburg, with a studio for her and an A5 office for him, 2 independent spaces connected by a living room full of light. It wasn't a romantic or impulsive decision, but practical and careful, taken after many conversations about expectations, limits, and the importance of maintaining their individualities, even within a relationship. Ethan continued in therapy. Amber continued painting her truth, and together they were learning that healthy love isn't about constant intensity or destructive passion, but about choosing every day to be better for each other. It was more difficult than the obsessive love that they had known before, but it was also more real, more lasting, more honest. And every night, when they lay together, Amber looked at the man beside her and felt an immense gratitude for having chosen the more difficult path, but also the truest one, the path of 2 wounded people.